The information provided on Terminal Addiction Podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not intended as a substitute for professional medical or mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, licensed therapist, or other qualified provider with any questions you might have regarding medical or mental health condition. Never disregard professional advice or delay seeking it because of something you heard on this podcast. The views and opinions expressed by the guests, the hosts, are their own, and they do not necessarily reflect those of any affiliated organization or institutions. While we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, we make no guarantee regarding the completeness, reliability, or applicability of the content discussed. Listening to this podcast does not establish provider-patient relationship. If you're experiencing a medical emergency or mental health crisis, please contact emergency services or crisis line immediately.
Imagine you're battling like the hardest, most isolating fight of your entire life.
Right.
And the only thing keeping you above water is this room full of people in, some church basement.
Yeah, that classic physical safety net.
Exactly. But then imagine waking up one morning in 2020 to find a literal padlock on that basement door. Like, where do you even go?
It is a terrifying scenario, honestly.
Yeah.
And, for millions of people navigating addiction during those global lockdowns, it wasn't just some hypothetical question. It was their immediate reality.
Yeah, and that's exactly why we're talking about this. Whether you're, just catching up on the latest tech trends today or you're deeply exploring the mental health space, today's topic for you is this truly fascinating collision of both of those worlds.
It really is.
So, okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is to explore this massive forced evolution in how humans heal. We're pulling our insights from a single source today, which is an excerpt from a bonus script for the Terminal Addiction Podcast.
Right, which is a great source.
It is. And we're tracking this journey that starts in the total physical isolation of the 2020 pandemic, and it accelerates all the way to the absolute frontier of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, and to really set the stage properly, we have to look at the baseline mechanics of traditional recovery.
Yeah.
Because for decades, the whole methodology relied almost exclusively on physical proximity.
The church basement.
Exactly, the church basement, the circle of metal folding chairs. It was entirely about shared physical space, mirroring body language, and literally breathing the same air as a community sitting shoulder to shoulder.
Yeah.
So the sudden removal of that physical anchor, it represented a massive psychological and sociological experiment on a global scale.
Right. And to understand where recovery tech is today, we have to deeply analyze that 2020 catalyst. I mean, we know treatment centers went on strict lockdown.
Complete lockdown.
And those vital face-to-face meetings were just shut down overnight. Take individuals like Paul B. and Doug H. from our source material.
Right. Two really compelling examples.
Yeah, they both found themselves starting their recovery journeys right in the middle of this unprecedented lockdown. They are stepping into a system that has just had its core infrastructure vaporized.
Which fundamentally alters the entire recovery trajectory. To understand why losing that physical room is such a profound crisis, we kind of have to look at the psychological mechanics of the disease itself.
Okay, break that down for us.
Well, addiction is a condition that inherently thrives in isolation. It operates by, actively cutting an individual off from their external support networks.
Right, it wants you alone.
Exactly. It creates this closed internal feedback loop of craving and rationalization. And the physical meeting room acts as an external disruptor to that loop.
It breaks the cycle.
Yes. It forces reality, accountability, and connection back into the individual's consciousness. So removing that sanctuary wasn't just a logistical hurdle during the pandemic.
No, of course not.
It was the literal removal of the primary defense mechanism against a disease that wants you entirely alone.
It's like trying to learn how to swim while the pool's being drained.
That is a perfect way to put it.
Right, you're just left flailing. Which pushes us to a critical mechanical question. When those physical doors are padlocked, where does that desperate human need for support actually go?
Well, the neurological drive for connection doesn't just evaporate because a building is closed.
No, it finds a way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In fact, due to the baseline global anxiety of 2020, that desperation was arguably stronger than ever. So the need essentially migrated online out of pure unadulterated necessity.
Since they had no other choice.
Right. The digital space completely transformed from just a supplementary tool into the primary lifeboat.
And we saw that, right? We saw this explosive systemic migration across platforms like Facebook, Instagram, and Telegram.
Oh, absolutely everywhere.
Yeah, support groups were just spitting up overnight. It was this frantic scramble to find a meeting anywhere at literally any hour. And this is where the architecture of recovery fundamentally changes.
It does. And what's fascinating here is the sheer scale of the systemic shift this created.
Yeah.
Think about the traditional model of a community center gathering. It is inherently hyperlocal. You are sitting across from your neighbors, maybe the guy from the local grocery store or your mechanic.
Right, people from your own zip code.
Exactly. The accountability is rooted in geographic proximity. But because of this sudden digital scramble, the social graph of recovery completely transformed.
It just exploded outwards.
It did. It shifted from a local, geographically bound gathering into these decentralized regional, national, and even international networks.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. You are suddenly sharing the darkest, most vulnerable parts of your psyche with individuals in different time zones, people whom you may never actually see in person.
I hear the scale of that, I really do, but I kind of have to push back on the actual psychological efficacy of that decentralized model.
Okay, sure.
Like, does an international Telegram chat actually offer the same vulnerability as a church basement? I mean, when you are hiding behind an avatar, just typing text onto a screen, are you genuinely exposing yourself to the friction of human connection?
That's the big question.
Because there's no body language to read, right? No trembling hands to observe. Does the sheer volume of 247 access really make up for that lack of physical presence?
That is the central tension of this whole evolutionary leap. It's a direct trade-off. You are essentially trading sensory truth for absolute availability.
Right.
In a physical room, you just cannot easily mask your state. The community can read your physical cues, which inherently enforces a certain level of honesty.
You can't hide if you're physically shaken.
Exactly. A Telegram chat entirely lacks that sensory truth. It's a curated output. You only type what you want them to see. However, the flip side of that equation is accessibility.
The 3.0 a.m. craving.
Precisely. In the traditional model, if a severe crisis hits at 3:0 a.m. on a Tuesday, the local community center is completely dark. You are alone with the feedback loop of the disease.
Which is terrifying.
It is. But in an international decentralized network, someone is always awake. That Telegram chat becomes an immediate, frictionless lifeline.
Wow. Yeah.
It demonstrates that digital bonds, while fundamentally different in their texture and, sensory input, possess this incredible resilience strictly due to their constant availability.
And proving that those asynchronous digital bonds are incredibly real, we see this fascinating phenomenon where the digital world eventually began bleeding back into the physical world.
Yes, the real-world crossover.
Right, because the isolation of the lockdowns inevitably ended. But these sprawling, decentralized networks didn't just dissolve back into local community centers.
No, not at all. They had established their own permanent gravity. The infrastructure actually held.
It really did. Look at the trajectory of Paul B. from our source material. He essentially incubates his early recovery entirely through these digital lifelines.
All online.
All online. And then, months later, he is walking onto an international cruise ship to physically meet up with a recovery group.
Which is just incredible.
It's amazing. And this wasn't just 2 or 3 people grabbing coffee, right? This was a highly coordinated group consisting of over 40 individuals from all across the country.
People who had never met in real life.
Never. All of whom originally forged their relationships through social media screens during the absolute height of the pandemic. And today, that specific digital-first group has grown to encompass thousands of members scattered across the entire globe.
Which is just a perfect illustration of the unmatched scalability of digital recovery. I mean, think about the psychological weight of that.
It's heavy.
It really is. A bond formed entirely through a piece of glass, through typed text and video compression during a period of intense global trauma, was strong enough to inspire dozens of people to invest real financial resources.
Yeah, flights are not cheap.
Right. They booked flights across the country to orchestrate a massive physical gathering on a cruise ship, and then to scale that initial core of 40 people into a network of thousands.
It's kind of unprecedented.
It totally validates the premise that the digital lifeboat wasn't merely a temporary pandemic patch. It evolved into a permanent, highly scalable vessel for human connection.
It's effectively like an internet pen pal club that accidentally and out of pure necessity evolves into a massive, life-saving global family.
Exactly.
But, if the transition to a global digital network was the first major evolution, The natural next step, and the really bleeding edge we are stepping into right now, is the integration of artificial intelligence into that ecosystem.
Yeah, the paradigm shift from connecting with geographically distant humans to connecting directly with algorithms.
Right. Because with the rapid acceleration of large language models, entirely new mechanics are entering the mental health space.
Mm.
We are looking at tools like Open Recovery, which is an AI recovery assistant.
Right, the chatbots?
Exactly. These are essentially highly tuned mental health chatbots designed to provide anytime, anywhere access to a sounding board. And there is a vital functional distinction here from the text.
What's that?
Well, these bots are obviously utilized when human help is simply unavailable. But crucially, they are also utilized when interacting with an algorithm feels inherently more comfortable than a face-to-face discussion with a human being.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we really need to unpack the underlying psychology of why a chatbot might offer a more comfortable environment for someone in the grip of addiction.
Okay, yeah, let's get into that.
We discussed earlier how the disease relies on isolation, and one of the primary enforcers of that isolation is shame.
Oh, absolutely.
Addiction carries this crushing, visceral weight of shame. When you sit across from another human being, even the absolute most empathetic sponsor in the world, there is an inherent, uncontrollable fear of judgment.
Because you can't control what they're thinking.
Right. You are looking into a human face, subconsciously bracing to see disappointment in their eyes.
Because humans naturally judge even when they are actively trying not to. It's just hardwired into us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But an AI possesses absolutely zero capacity for judgment. It is a completely neutral, synthetic sounding board.
Yeah.
So for an individual who is paralyzed by the shame of, say, a recent relapse, the anticipated friction of confessing to a human might just be too overwhelming.
They might just not do it at all.
Exactly. But confessing to a machine, typing it into an empty void that literally cannot be disappointed in you, that might bypass the shame entirely, allowing the individual to actually get the words out.
Wow, yeah.
It offers a space with zero fear of human judgment during a moment of profound vulnerability.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, and where I find myself hitting a solid wall with this architectural shift.
Okay, let's hear it.
Isn't the foundation of recovery fundamentally built on shared human empathy? I mean, the entire efficacy of a sponsor is the "I have been exactly where you are" factor.
Yeah, the shared experience.
Yeah. So how can a string of code, a predictive text model that has never felt the physical agony of a craving, never destroyed a personal relationship, how can that algorithm effectively guide a complex human nervous system through the actual messiness of recovery?
You are hitting on the exact philosophical and clinical divide currently fracturing the modern recovery community.
Well, am I? Good.
You absolutely are. The critical distinction is that the AI is not experiencing empathy. It is mathematically simulating empathy.
Simulating.
Yes. It relies on vast data sets of human communication to recognize patterns. If you input a statement of despair, the algorithm recognizes the linguistic pattern of that despair.
And spits out the right words.
Exactly. It outputs a response that statistically aligns with what an empathetic human would say.
Which, fundamentally feels like an illusion. It's pattern recognition masquerading as shared trauma.
It is a simulation, without question.
Right.
But we have to measure utility alongside authenticity.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, for an individual spiraling in a crisis state, simulated empathy that is delivered flawlessly in 3 seconds might be functionally more effective at de-escalating a panic attack than genuine human empathy that won't be available until a community meeting at 7:00 p.m. tomorrow.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it like that.
Yeah, the speed and availability of the simulation offer a distinct clinical utility. However, your skepticism bridges perfectly into the severe structural warnings surrounding this technology in our source material.
Absolutely it does, because leaning into that simulated empathy creates a massive accountability dilemma.
You really do.
These tools are actively reducing the frequency of face-to-face interactions, and that brings us to the core conflict. Accountability to an algorithm is fundamentally, structurally, and psychologically different than accountability to a person.
100%.
And we're moving into a reality where this technology isn't going away, so we have to critically analyze how we interact with it most efficiently and effectively.
Let's break down the sociology of accountability, because it is the absolute bedrock of long-term behavioral change.
Let's do it.
When you establish a relationship with a human sponsor, you're basically signing a complex social contract.
Right.
If you relapse, the mechanics of that contract dictate that you must pick up the phone,
Yeah.
hear the disappointment in another human's voice, and admit that you broke your commitment.
That sounds brutal.
It is. The friction of that social interaction, the heavy, uncomfortable, emotional weight of letting down someone who has invested their time in you, is often the exact barrier that prevents a relapse when a craving hits.
Right. I want you, the listener, to visualize the stark difference in these two mechanisms right now.
Yeah, picture it.
Imagine the friction of looking a friend, a mentor, straight in the eye and admitting you fell short. Your heart rate spikes, your palms sweat.
It's a visceral reaction.
It is. Now compare that to confessing a relapse to a screen. Just typing words into a frictionless chat window and hitting send.
There's no sweat there.
None at all. The bot is always awake, and it is always in your pocket, but it absolutely cannot hold your feet to the fire the way a human can.
Not at all.
I mean, a language model is not going to notice that you've gone dark for 3 days, drive to your house, knock on your front door, and pull you out of a dark room.
It is the inherent danger of frictionless interaction. Breaking a promise to an algorithm carries zero social or emotional consequence.
Because it's just code.
Right. As we established, an AI cannot be disappointed in you. And in the architecture of recovery, the fear of disappointing your community, of breaking that social contract, is often the ultimate safety net.
It keeps you honest.
It creates necessary friction. If an individual relies too heavily on the asymmetrical parasocial relationship with an AI, where they receive comfort but face no genuine accountability, they risk losing the therapeutic value of the struggle that inherently comes with navigating real human relationships.
It is the vital distinction between utilizing a tool and belonging to a community. A tool can help you bail water, but it can't tell you which way to row.
That's exactly right.
But speaking of the complex ways we interact with AI and how deeply technology is blurring the lines of what is real, there is a massive, almost unsettling meta twist regarding the very source material we are analyzing today.
Oh yeah, it is a phenomenal structural pivot that
Yes.
completely reframes the entire discussion.
It really does. So we are going through this bonus script for the Terminal Addiction podcast, extracting all these profound insights about Paul B., the pandemic lockdown mechanisms, the cruise ship meetups, the psychological trade-offs of open recovery.
Yeah.
And then the script reveals this final detail. The bonus episode that provided all of this incredibly nuanced information about human connection. It was not hosted by humans.
Yep.
The voices delivering the audio were entirely generated by artificial intelligence.
The literal vocal cords vibrating to warn us about the loss of human connection were, in fact, entirely synthetic.
Yes, it is completely mind-bending.
That's wild.
But, crucially, the script clarifies that the episode was entirely written by the human Paul B.
Right, the human element was still there.
Exactly. So the lived experience, the trauma of isolation, the actual human struggle of finding a digital lifeboat was completely authentic. The foundation was flesh and blood, but the delivery mechanism was completely artificial.
This raises an important question, and perhaps the most complex question of this entire deep dive.
Let's hear it.
Does the underlying message of recovery, the raw truth of battling addiction, still retain its psychological resonance if the voice delivering it is synthetic?
That's the million-dollar question.
Does the listener's brain process the empathy differently once it knows the vocal inflections are just generated code, provided the underlying human experience of Paul B.'s writing remains the architectural foundation?
So what does this all mean?
Yeah.
It forces a total reevaluation of how we consume truth. We are synthesizing a reality in this AI-infused era where profoundly human stories of survival, of crushing despair, of building a global family out of pandemic isolation, are being actively amplified by synthetic voices.
The new paradigm.
It really is. The container holding the message has completely transformed, even if the contents inside are still fundamentally, undeniably human.
It forces us to delineate where the value of communication truly lies.
Yeah.
Is the value inextricably linked to the physical breath behind the microphone, the biological reality of the speaker? Or does the value reside entirely in the structural truth of the words themselves?
That is heavy.
It is.
Yeah.
If Paul B.'s deeply human story of surviving a lockdown is able to reach a person spiraling in crisis purely because an AI voice generator was able to produce and distribute that audio instantaneously across a global network,
Yeah.
then perhaps the technology is serving its highest possible function.
Maybe it is.
But it still remains a really jarring cognitive dissonance to confront.
It is entirely jarring to realize the empathy you felt was delivered by an algorithm.
Yeah.
So let's bring all these threads together. We have tracked an astonishing architectural shift today.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We started in the terrifying physical isolation of the 2020 lockdowns, examining how the sudden padlocking of church basements forced an immediate, desperate pivot.
Right.
We explored the mechanics of how people found a decentralized lifeboat on platforms like Telegram, proving that asynchronous digital connection could intercept a 3.0 a.m. crisis.
Which is huge.
Huge. And then we saw how those digital bonds possessed enough gravity to bleed back into the physical world, creating massive global networks and international cruise meetups.
Literal global family.
Exactly. And finally, we analyzed the current frontier. The complex psychological trade-offs of leaning on simulated empathy tools like open recovery, and the accountability dilemma of substituting a frictionless AI for a human sponsor.
It is a profound, incredibly rapid evolution from the physical friction of the folding chair to the frictionless availability of the algorithm.
It really is. And I want to leave you with a lingering thought, something to deeply consider that builds on the architecture we've mapped out today. If an algorithm can successfully simulate enough empathy to guide a person through a panic attack, and a decentralized digital network can forge a permanent global family, maybe our traditional definition of human connection isn't strictly tied to physical proximity anymore.
That's a fascinating point.
Maybe, at its core, connection is simply the psychological relief of feeling truly heard. So the next time you open up to a screen, whether you are venting about work, socializing in a chat, or actively seeking help in a dark moment, ask yourself, is the technology actually comforting you? Or is it just acting as a highly tuned mirror, simply reflecting your own internal resilience back at you?
A frictionless mirror you carry right in your pocket.
Exactly. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the architecture of the world around you. Keep looking for those real connections wherever the mechanisms might hide them, and we will catch you next time.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect those of any affiliated organization. This content is for informational purposes only and is not intended for professional advice. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend. Until next time.